Cammy and Setty's strategy starts from the moment they hit the ground. Because this bus path is on the relatively north side of the zone, that means that players are going to be flying relatively far to get down to the drop spots that are on the south. That means that when Cammy and Setty land, Cammy can instantly run to a hammer AR and get 48 damage of Storm Surge on players that are flying through the sky. This is a strategy they've used in nearly every single season, including Chapter 2 Season 8 when they actually won FNCS. Once they've landed, they really have two priorities in their early game. The first one is obviously metal. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll know early game harvesting metal is the most important thing you can pretty much do, and the second is speed. Notice how basically everything that Cammy and Setty do here is about efficiency. Setty is destroying these ammo boxes using the ramps rather than harvesting and pickaxing through them because that saves time. He does this repeatedly throughout his entire looting path. Not only this, his looting path is extremely replicable. He does the exact same path every single game over and over again, which shows just how practiced this path actually is. Repeatedly doing the same path every single game will speed it up and make it as efficient as possible, but they also use the chrome splashes to be able to rotate faster. In every single game, Setty uses these chrome splashes at exactly the same position, just to move a little bit further towards the vault. One of the most interesting parts of high-level Fortnite competitive games is how two teams that are very close to each other will end up interacting with one another. In this situation, Setty is going to the vault. Now, he's practiced this so many times that he knows there's a huge amount of bushes down below, and there's a bunch of teams in the surroundings that will sit and camp in these bushes and try and take advantage of the fact that he's split from his duo. To counter this, he ends up building up high onto a ramp in an angle where he'll be able to look down inside of those bushes and see if there's any players in them. But because Trulex and Chicho, a team that lands near them in Rocky Reels, have played against them for so long, they know they're going to be going to the vault, meaning that he can set up and get a couple easy more Storm Surge tags onto Setty whilst he's going to loot the vault. Interesting enough, in the next game, Setty places more walls to protect himself from this angle and scouts the entire of Rocky Reels before dropping down to ensure he doesn't get tagged and lose this HP. Because Cammy and Setty land in the mid-map, when they pull a south zone here, they can throw a lot of these extra heals they have from looting the vault and looting the area around them into the base that they're sitting in. Most notably, notice how many med mists they have in here to heal up their white heals. This is so that they can stay in this exact position as teams rotate past them into the zone, and they can shoot them in the back, giving them a ton of Storm Surge damage. But the most important part is the timing in which they leave this zone. The time in which they choose to leave is roughly 10 seconds before the third zone has fully closed, as this means when they're in the sky, the fourth zone will appear and they can choose where they want to land. In this game, they land in the center of the fourth zone, which gives them an easy rotate to the next zone, the fifth one, and ultimately they end up winning this game, which is the catalyst for them winning the entire tournament. However, this strategy isn't always going to work because there's some games where the zone will be too far away and there's not other balloons that you can end up continuing this path from. So what Cammy and Setty end up doing is carrying some shield bubbles in their inventory. Cammy and Setty know the spawn locations of the boats around the map, so they can just simply throw this on top of one and rotate safely into the next zone. I did cover this earlier in a video this week, however I really want to go in depth with this strategy because this was a huge part of their success. And it's not only that they know how to use bubble shields, they know how to play around them when other teams use them. In this situation, Reason and Aqua are below Storm Surge and getting tagged for it. They throw a bubble shield on top of the box that Cammy and Setty are on to create a secluded fight that no one can third party. Now, being a defensive team in a fight where no one can third party means you're already starting the fight at a disadvantage. So as soon as the shield bubble pops, Cammy and Setty ensure that they change layers so that they're on the outside of it and that another team can then intervene if they need to. Since Aqua and Reason are below Storm Surge, there's a lot of pressure on them already, and this layer change and being more exposed in the fight amplifies that even more. This essentially forces Aqua and Reason to make a hyper-aggressive play and jump in the box. And because they've got low HP from being tagged A from the players third partying and B from the Surge, this gives Cammy and Setty the upper hand and allows them to pick up 2 easy eliminations despite the fact that Setty actually goes down. In this situation, I was trying to analyze and predict what Setty and Cammy would do. Now they have 2 launch pads, however they're on a very low layer. Since they've pulled this first moving zone, they can just use 1 launch pad to fully make it into this next zone. So what I imagine they would do would be build up, get to a good layer, spray some players at the back, and then use that launch pad to just fully skip the first moving zone. Now this is a fair assumption because this is what they do in a lot of their games. If we take game number 6, you can see them sprint to the front side of zone, build up a few layers, spray the players at the back, and then hit this launch pad to take them fully through the first moving zone. And a small side tangent on how this is actually possible, if you notice they were flying from the balloon and the place they decided to land was on the far side of this 5th zone, which if you know anything about this is the dead side. So notice how there's no real players around them to the north. This means that when that next zone, the first moving zone, pulls up towards that north, they have complete free reign just to sprint up to that way, get ahead, and then build up a few layers so they can take this pad from there. But back to game 1, because this is not what they actually end up doing. You see, Setty and Cammy's brain is much bigger than mine, and they remembered that they have a bunch of old builds on low ground that they could just start to edit their way through without wasting anything at all. Not only this, they have a bunch of spare mats left right at the end of this, meaning that basically at the end of the first moving zone, they're capped, and have 2 launch pads. Now, Cammy and Setty have cemented themselves a legacy as the best mid to low ground team in EU. However, if you've been paying attention and you were watching the FNCS Invitational, when you saw them on height in game number 1, it should come as absolutely no surprise to you. They've been switching up their gameplay all year to try and win more games, because this will give them larger point individual matches, but they'll be able to keep the consistency, therefore being able to win tournaments rather than just continually placing in the top 10. Now, there are a lot of really interesting intricacies on how they retake height. Let's continue on with game number 1 as a good example. After they've hit this launch pad, they land relatively high, and for the entire second moving zone, the 7th zone, they stay very close to second height. They stagger, aka stop, 3 different times throughout this rotation. And every single time that they do this, they're looking up at height, seeing if there's an opportunity to spray it out. And pretty much throughout the entire rotation, Cammy is looking up, trying to spray out that team up there. Now that team up there is Vino and Queasy, and they know how to hold high ground, so it's not an easy task by any means. Come to the end of this zone, and now you're into the zone transitions. And this is where opportunities open up for taking high ground or low ground. So in this zone transition, Cammy and Setty down below still have a lot of materials. Since they've been spraying Queasy and Vino up on high ground a lot, and the materials they had been using was purely wood for a long time, it's easy to assume that they have very minimal materials. So what they do is create a 2x2 box down in this zone transition to give them enough space to work with, and they can see that Queasy starts to get aggressive onto the wall, which is the telltale sign yet again that they need a refresh and are lower on materials. After Cammy chunks him back for a mid 30 damage shot, the basic minimum, both Cammy and Setty double crank out the front side of the zone with a synchronized double ramp. They ensure they're sprinting at the same time, so placing ramps, sprint to get extra speed. However, this retake is secured by 4 wooden ramps, which, although it doesn't sound like a lot, takes time to shoot through, meaning they instantly grab high ground from Queasy and Vino, and from there on, win the game. The fact that they were on a high layer throughout the majority of the second moving zone and were continually draining the materials of Queasy and Vino, who still had height at that time, gave them the opportunity to then retake it with this nice, 2018 style double ramp rush. But of course, there is a lot of issues when you're the team who's second height. If the team up on height has a lot of ammo and still has materials, they're just going to completely lobby focus you. But this is something that in game number 6, Cammy and Setty dealt with in a fantastic way. We've covered a lot of shield bubble strategies from them already, but continuing to carry a shield bubble into endgame actually allows you to play a second height layer. As soon as you start to get focused by height and from the rest of the lobby, just throw down the shield bubble, get yourself time to heal, and you're instantly going to lose that focus. I said shield bubbles were one of the best items in the game. This is now 3 different examples of how Cammy and Setty have used them to win this tournament. Now this is through second moving zone, however there's other situations I saw of them pressuring high ground and manipulating the full lobby. Now if we look at game number 11, they do the same strategy as we talked about earlier on, where they get ahead of the zone and use that single launch pad to get them through the first moving zone. However, in this situation, high ground is a total mess, so rather than spraying backwards, they actually spray forwards onto the teams up on height and chop them all out. Now what this does is that any team going for high ground at this moment is going to be draining a ton of materials. This doesn't mean that they're going to take high ground now, this means that they're preparing for it later by already weakening some of the teams up there. In this instance, this is Macwood and Canada, and they end up actually going to take height from them almost 2 full zones later when they chop them out, pick up Canada, and then crank up. So So their playstyle is very mid-ground heavy, but they're always having a constant yet safe way to pressure and manipulate the high ground players. Now, of course, the final winning moment was them going 2v2 up against Cuisine Vino. Whoever wins the fight wins the biggest tournament of the last 3 years. And I've broken that entire fight down and the entire tournament of the FNCS Invitational in this video right here. So after you've liked and subscribed, click right here.